Good evening, ladies and gents. I've got the last slot, and I hope I still have the attention. What we'll do is that I've tried to cut the inner city video, and I think mine will simply be to share a bit of insights and thoughts as to where the city is and where we hope to go. And the idea is that we join in the journey. You influence a lot of what we do. We can't do it alone, and I think that's the essence, and it's a recurring theme that comes. So I'd like to thank also CBD Talks for making this opportunity. I think it comes at a critical time. Do enjoy, and we'll talk a little bit about the elements around that. So you will have heard Russell refer to the 2 years of work that we undertook from 2015 till mid-2017. A lot of what is there is in fact in planning. A lot of it is on the ground. And so we complete the promenade upgrade, 750 more to the 6.5 kilometers. In November, you'll be able to walk past Ushaka, right up to Vetch's Pier. Elevated promenade with a variety of water sports facility. I see some enthusiasts there. And really a lot of it has been, how do we make Durban great? So ahead of the 2010, you saw the upgrades come up. We had in excess of 300 million investment recently, Suncoast 1.6 billion. And you see how private sector reciprocate when the confidence is there. But again, we sit and we say, how do you regenerate a city? Do you do so by big-scale projects? We had an architect internally that once said, I think a few years ago, says, Durban does well in specific projects. So we create these centers of excellence, and we battle with the connections. And that has been the focus of our work. And so whether you look at the ICC surrounded by perhaps poor connections, you see the beach, it's battle to connect back into the city, the point, how does it connect back to the city, sports precinct, how does it, and so that has been the essence of the inner city regeneration plan, because our focus and understanding is that whilst we can get the mega big projects right, you regenerate a city block by block, street by street. And that becomes the important essence. And so the big things are good. Point waterfront, we're behind it, it's moving. But how do we get the connection between Point and ICC? And that's Mahatma Gandhi. And many of you, when you think of the Point, you think, jeepers, how do I get through Mahatma Gandhi with all the chaos that ensues there? And that's the focus of our work. We're going into construction, and so you'll see quite a chaotic Anton Lembede. An 800 diameter pipe is running down the middle lane, and it's part of the infrastructure response to the 450,000 population. And so part of this plan is not pie in the sky. It's reinforced and a back pass back to the services that we require. And so one of those is upgrading our water supply, and that runs along Mahatma Gandhi to connect to the Point. It's a response to the Point development, but also to the inner city. And so when we do that, there's a series of projects that we plan in and around that. And so Mahatma Gandhi being an important one, a variety of bed buildings in the area, quite a strong social housing program that comes on the back of it. And again, we've had to ask ourselves the tough questions. How do we then deal with the block-by-block approach? Everywhere in the world, whether you see it on TV or you travel, living next to a park is quite cool. People buy on the 18th floor. There's a nice park next to you. But in Durban, it seems a little bit difficult to stay next to a park these days. And so we've had to have the tough conversation. I grew up as a kid. I'm not that old, but when I take my kids to the park, it still looks like when I was a kid. And so we've failed to improve and respond. And what that has done is that we've been overtaken by shopping centers and other adventure thrills and other recreational things, and we've been left behind, and we've had to ask the question, what are public spaces if they do not respond to the end user requirement? And so what does the end user require? And so part of what we do on the beach, we are inundated with a lot of requests, innovative, creative things. And so you have a lot of people coming in, would like to use a piece of land, would like to, put up cricket nets, we run a coaching clinic and the sort. And so whilst you say no to this because there's a strenuous process that you must go through, you've got parks that don't work, that have become dysfunctional. You then get a call that one of the parks on the back of North Beach, that a kid is having a 5th birthday and our law enforcement is closing them down because you can't have a birthday in a park. And my response is, but everything else happens in the park that we battle to get. And so these are the things that we must begin to respond to, because these are the practical everyday things. And so whilst you sitting here see these grand plans, you often wonder when we get the basics right, when we get the parks to be functional, when we get the litter to be picked up, when it must be picked up, and the sort. And so we've traveled this journey in part with this plan. Parks have come around as slowly as they have, but they've joined forces. And so imagine a park that can house cricket nets, does have a small amphitheater, does have a section for kiddies parties, does have Wi-Fi and good lighting, in fact becomes a breeding ground for the next big facilities management company, not Busasa, of course, but the next big FM company. Because in the process, you create opportunity. And so we've had to then say, parks, what is the benefit of public when public is not safe? Because public spaces must have accountability. And currently, when the accountability slowly diminishes, we must then have a rethink. And so, again, part of our theme on the beach, we're rethinking our operations. We believe that there are a lot of inefficiencies, and so when we rethink them, we've got to consider what does not work in the system. And so in rethinking, we deployed a few of those thoughts. Festive season, they've returned well, and we're now institutionalizing some of these. And so as we journey with parks, we're saying, look, we're not looking at commercializing your parks, but what we're saying is that perhaps an introduction of commercial may just help them turn around, because you are no longer competing with things that are not, and I think Murray puts it well, the profit-driven motive. When last do you wake up and your kids say, Mom, Dad, I want to go to the park? And so when do we return to that space when parks are the equivalent of a shopping center and everything else? And that's really what we're trying to get at. And so when you buy on the 18th floor of an apartment, you're not just buying the 4 walls, you're buying the quality of the open space which the city has. And so generally, that's one of the areas that we believe we want. And so how do we impact the public realm? And so when we move beyond that, we said, well, we've got to rethink these processes. You imagine, you drive down into Commercial Street from sort of the suburban area. We've got litter bags opened because we've got a lot of homeless, and they're looking to get something that is tangible. It's a Monday morning or a Wednesday morning or a Thursday morning. And so when we sit with DSW, we say, DSW, could we not rejig this? I mean, it's a Monday morning, it's traffic, your truck is there, traffic is coming in. If we were to talk to some of the business and the retailers, let's collect in the evening. How do we incentivize them to collect in the evening so that on a working day, we don't experience what we experience coming into the city? And so these are the small interventions that transform the way we perceive our city coming in the morning. And so whilst there are big and bold things, we've got to rethink the basics. It may have worked at a point in time, but it requires us to rethink. Our spaces, how do we repurpose them? to bring back meaning to those that once believed the public space and trusted the public space. And so how do we then detail a bit of retail, a coffee shop, this on the edge of a park, underutilized sites that are in transition, don't have to be built up immediately? How do those become pop-up gardens? How do those become, your urban spaces, your food trucks? These are the things we want to journey with you. Because when you start to experience this, you start to interact. When last did you walk down Stenger Street? It's a daunting task. I had my DCM at one meeting. He says, give me a lift, I need to pick up my car. I said, Jeepers, I'm sure you'd enjoy a walk across. He said, I don't think I'm in the mood for that. But we've gotten so used to driving past the inner city. We don't experience the city center. And so what are those things that bring us back? And one of the things that we're going to be boldly doing later on this year is putting out an expression of interest for some of the running and cycling clubs to respond to. We spend a lot of money, you may not notice it, but we do, in all the closures. So, a club comes, we want a 10-kilometer race or a cycle, the amount of resources that go into that. And so we're saying, how about permanently making running and cycle routes? Let's build a new spine. The city must be anchored, and so for the longest time it's been built around mobility, cars. Now, how about transforming some of the spaces? And so let's look at 5, 10, 15, 20 K routes. Because we've seen what it's done to the beach, the park runs are a success. But now how do we bring those people into the city center? Because once you run the city center, the next chap sees an opportunity for a coffee bar so that you can take a break. The next guy sees a nice bicycle shop, and that's slap bang in the middle of the city, a place you wouldn't otherwise have visited if you didn't run up past it. And so these are the things, the small interventions that we've got to look at. But if we don't journey with you, we may miss the plot completely. You may not understand why we are doing certain things, and it requires us to test it with you. And so what does the plan talk to? It talks about strengthening the connections. We've done well on the beach. The ICC exists as a center of excellence, but Rivertown continues to lag behind. How do we strengthen those connections? Russell speaks about urban lime, perpetuity. They are in the space, and so how do we impact and influence the public space to begin to create that vision of what we want in strengthening those connections, so that when our international guests or locals are booked into the beach, attending a conference at ICC, they don't need a cab to get to ICC. It's a joyful walk or a bicycle ride to the ICC. How do we connect the ICC back to the sports precinct? We often say South Africans don't like to walk. I question people and I say, imagine walking along Masabala Layengo. What do you interact with? There's nothing. It's blank walls, and so we've got to intensify that space. And so again, it is careful planning, it is understanding why we are here. And in responding to that, we have got to then understand that the small things change. Our discussions with ETA suggest that there are some roads that we don't need. And so before we take them all out, let's agree between 5 and 6 the next morning, they change character. And let's see how they perform. But we are not going to run a carnival or a food this or a this that. You are. And so we've got to have the conversation so that all of a sudden you're not frustrated that a road between 6 and 6 is closed. But in fact, you seize the moment and the opportunity to begin to transform that space, because we begin to imagine and vision what it can be when it's no longer a thoroughfare for cars. And so this is really the journey of the inner city. I had some of the tenants on the beach and the hotels saying, you know, the beach after 5, it's a nightmare. It's not a good place to be. And so we said, naturally, what do you think the problem is? No, we're not sure. I mean, there's just too many vagrants and there's just too many things. We said, okay, let's just audit what we have. And we came out with 70% of the facilities on the beachfront are clubs and municipal offices. So we said, there you go, that's your answer. Because what happens at 5? They shut down. So if 70% of the beach shuts down at 5, you are left with pockets of retail. And so naturally people don't go. When people don't go, other opportunistic elements come in. And so we all know people's spaces are probably the safest spaces. And so how do we then turn around? And that's where it takes us to redeveloping, repurposing our buildings. Do we need municipal functions right on the promenade? Perhaps not. Where do we consolidate them so that we could repurpose those buildings to more retail-orientated and active edge? Let's do more with what we have rather than wanting to build more. And this is really the journey we're about. This is where we'd like to go, and we'd like to encourage you to be part of this journey. And so I've touched on a variety of elements, but as I wrap it up so that I don't lose all of you, we are looking at a connected city. And so you will have seen 7 precincts. How do we connect those precincts to talk to each other? And so from the centers of excellence, how do we connect for prosperity, active edges, a bit of a sense of place when people are here? How do we encourage, deal with the incentivization of bad buildings? A conversation we had 2 weeks ago, we said, look, we can talk about people urinating in public spaces till we're blue in the face. What is our response? Do we even understand how people move in the inner city, such that we understand the capacity that we provide in different areas? And so that has led us to what is an exciting contract that we're putting up as our sort of claim to fame of going back to the basics. And so we're never going to be done, Dade Russell, by the Manhattans of the world. And so we've also got what we're calling our lower inner city. Lower inner city, and intentionally so, you know, it's, everything is in a name. It inspires, it gives you a little bit of focus. And so the whole inner city we're serious about, but we're saying, look, our focus is lower inner city. Lower inner city is bordered on the west by Dorothy Nyembe, former Gardner Street, Soldiers Way, Umgeni. On the west, it's the Umgeni River and the harbor on the south, and of course on the east, the beach. And we've got about 10 zones in that area. The idea behind that is this is where most of government's investment has been over the last 10 years. This is where most private sector investment has been. How do we consolidate and get the basics right? And so what we've done, we've gone in a categorization process. We've taken the facilities management model and we've flipped it into public space, and we're calling that a public space management contract. And the idea is that we've graded the different zones. There's a platinum precinct, and this is not informed by any stretch of imagination, by property values, but rather by intensity of use. Because we've realized that it's not what we don't do, it's that we spread our resources evenly in the interest of equality, but in reality, some places are used more than others. And so we are always caught out in the areas that are highly used. Our resources don't stretch as much. And so the idea behind the public space management contract is that let's respond equally to the intensity of use with intensity of service and operation, so that we really maintain a balanced operation. And so we've graded them platinum, there's gold, there's silver, and that really mimics an intensity of use, so that the resources we deploy respond to the user intensity. It's quite exciting. We are looking to launch it in April, mid-April of this year. It begins to give a sense of accountability. It is a social contract between ourselves and the property owners, the users of the spaces, and we're quite hopeful that it will return what we have been missing, getting the basics right, so that it gives a springboard to all the wonderful things that you see and the big and the small projects that we're looking for. I hope that that has given you a little bit of insight into where the city is thinking and where the city wants to go, and I encourage you to be part of that journey. Let's have the conversation. We are open for business, and let's be part of the story in changing and shaping the city of Durban. Thank you.